Some mornings feel almost too gentle to trust. The kind of morning that wraps itself around you like it's promising nothing will ever go wrong again. Marcus Bell woke up before the sun had bothered to rise, the same way he did every day since. He came back home. The house was still, a little cold, and smelled faintly of the lavender detergent he used on his daughter's clothes. He stood by the kitchen sink, pressing the edge of the counter into his palms, letting the silence hold him steady. He ironed his security guard uniform until the seams were sharp enough to make his mother proud. That uniform was a small shield against the way some people looked at him, like a problem waiting to happen. He'd learned that if he looked crisp, spoke clear, stood tall, it might buy him a little space, a little patience. A chance to prove he was just a man trying to do right. His daughter Lila patted in, her hair wild from sleep, hugging her stuffed bear like it held all the secrets of the world. He felt his chest loosen when she smiled at him. For a moment, all he could see was her. The life he'd built brick by careful brick. He poured her cereal, listening to her chatter about the spelling test she was nervous about. He told her she'd do fine, because she always did fine. She was braver than she knew. He had a plan for today. Drive Leela to school, cash his paycheck, pick up groceries, and maybe, just maybe, come home feeling like he'd finally caught up to his bills. Payday was the only day he let himself dream a little bigger than the rent. The neighborhood was quiet when he stepped out to warm up the car. But under that quiet, there was something else, a caution you could taste in the air. The way the old man next door nodded to him without meeting his eyes. The way a mother pulled her son closer when a cruiser rolled past the corner. The way Marcus felt his own shoulders tighten, even when he told himself not to. He'd lived with this hush his whole life. It settled over black folks like a second skin. You learn to keep your hands visible, your tone even, your movements slow. You learn to say yes, sir, and no, sir, no matter how bitter it tasted. Because one wrong word could flip the world over before you even understood why. Still, this morning felt good. He felt almost light as he buckled Lila into her seat and kissed her forehead. He pulled away from the curb, with the sun finally breaking over the rooftops. Maybe this would be a day that passed without incident. Maybe he'd get to keep that gentleness a little longer. Halfway to the school, he noticed the patrol car behind him. It wasn't close enough to crowd his bumper, but it kept pace. He glanced in the mirror, tried to read the expression on the officer's face, but the glare on the windshield turned him into a shape with no features. Marcus told himself it was nothing, routine. Maybe they were headed somewhere else. He turned onto Jefferson, and the cruiser turned too. He swallowed, feeling his heart start that quiet, miserable thumping he knew too well. He kept his hands at 10 and 2. He slowed at every yellow light. He signaled so early it must have looked ridiculous. All the while, he felt Lila's eyes on him, curious. He forced a smile when she asked if everything was okay. He said it was fine, sweetheart, Daddy's just being careful, but inside he was already bracing. Because he knew what this was. He knew that when you fit a description no one bothered to write down, when your skin matched the outline of someone's suspicion, it didn't matter what you'd done, or what you hadn't done at the school. The cruiser kept going. He breathed out, telling himself he'd been overthinking it. He kissed Leela's cheek and watched her run up the steps, her backpack bouncing. He waited until she was inside before he turned toward the bank. On the drive, he felt that flicker of hope again. Maybe this would be the morning he finally stopped, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe it was possible to be a black man in America and not feel hunted. He almost laughed at himself for believing it. As he turned into the bank parking lot, he noticed the cruiser again. It was coming from the other direction, slow as a shadow. His throat tightened. He parked, gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned pale. He counted to 5. Then he reached for his check, his ID, the envelope for the teller. Everything he needed to show he belonged here. Everything that might prove he was a man worth believing. And in that moment, just before he stepped out into the morning, he wondered if any of it would matter. This is David from Injustice Voice. If you're feeling the weight of Marcus's story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your anger, your hopes. Stories like this deserve to be heard. When he opened his door, the cruiser swung in behind his car. The lights flashed, and all that gentleness drained right out of the day, leaving nothing but the cold reality waiting to swallow him whole. Marcus stood there for half a second, holding his check like it could protect him. He felt the air shift. People in the lot stopped moving. A woman with a toddler glanced over, her face tightening. He lowered his gaze, because meeting eyes sometimes made things worse. The door of the cruiser opened. The officer climbed out slow, deliberate, like he wanted everyone to see. He was young, maybe early 30s, with hair clipped so close you could see the pink of his scalp. His hand rested on the grip of his sidearm, not drawn. Just waiting. Marcus swallowed. He made sure both his hands were visible. He took a breath that didn't fill his lungs. The officer called out, voice sharp enough to cut. "Sir, step away from the vehicle." Marcus did as he was told. He kept his tone steady. "Officer, is there a problem?" The man's mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for. Stay where you are." Marcus felt the world tilt a fraction. He'd heard those words before. In different cities, different years, spoken by different men with the same authority in their voice. He wanted to ask what the description was, but he already knew. Black male. Medium build, dark clothing. He tried again, softer. "Officer, I'm on my way to deposit my paycheck. I can show you my ID." The officer's eyes flicked over the bank envelope in Marcus's hand, then back to his face. "Put that down." "Hands where I can see them." Marcus set the envelope carefully on the hood. He felt his pulse hammering in his ears. A couple cars pulled into the lot, then turned around when they saw the flashing lights. Nobody wanted to get too close. A second cruiser pulled in, tires crunching over loose gravel. Another officer stepped out. He was older, heavier, and didn't bother to look at Marcus. Just walked up and stood beside the first man, arms folded. The young officer spoke again. "We got a call about a robbery suspect in the area. Step toward me." Marcus lifted his hands higher. "Officer, I haven't done anything. I just dropped my daughter at school." The older officer shifted his weight. His voice was flat. "You fit the description." Those 4 words felt like a door slamming shut. He looked around. A couple bystanders had pulled out their phones. One woman was whispering to someone on her speakerphone. Marcus thought of his daughter sitting in class, waiting for him to pick her up later. He knew if he refused, they'd say he was resisting. He knew if he argued, they'd say he was escalating. So he did the only thing he could. He took a slow step forward. Then another. When he was close enough that he could see the sweat beading along the young officer's hairline, he stopped. The officer nodded to the older man, who came around behind Marcus. "Hands behind your back." Marcus closed his eyes. He pressed his lips together, so he wouldn't say something that would haunt him. He felt the cold metal slide around his wrists. Felt the click as it locked shut. The younger officer reached for the wallet in Marcus's back pocket, without asking. Marcus bit down on the urge to flinch. The older man spoke under his breath, like Marcus was furniture. "We'll see if he's got priors." Marcus opened his eyes and looked across the lot. An elderly black woman stood by the sidewalk. She wore a grocery store apron and held a plastic bag of onions against her chest like a shield. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Not pity, something older. Like she was seeing every time this had ever happened to her son, her brother, her father. He tried to hold on to that look, because it made him feel less alone. But it also made the humiliation burn hotter in his chest. The young officer returned with Marcus's wallet and his check. He flipped the check over, reading it out loud like he thought it was funny. Security Solutions Incorporated. $475. Payday, huh? Marcus said nothing. The officer looked at the envelope again, then at Marcus, then back at the envelope. He seemed almost disappointed that it wasn't more evidence of something. After a moment, he turned to the older man. Call it in. The older officer stepped away to his radio. Marcus could hear the dispatcher's voice crackling. He tried to steady his breathing. He remembered the desert, the checkpoint nights when every truck could be hiding a bomb. He remembered thinking he'd never feel that same fear again once he made it home. And yet here he was, heart hammering, hands cuffed behind his back, in front of strangers who would go home tonight and tell their families they saw a thug get arrested. The young officer shifted his weight. You got any weapons in the vehicle? No, sir. Anything illegal? No, sir. He waited for the next question. Waited for the next reason to strip a little more of his dignity away. From the corner of his eye, he saw someone filming. A teenager in a blue hoodie, holding up his phone like it was the only defense he could offer. Marcus didn't know if he should be grateful or ashamed. Maybe both. He stood there, cuffed and silent, while the sun climbed higher over the lot, warming the metal hood where his paycheck still lay. He thought about Lila, about the spelling test, about the cereal bowl sitting in the sink at home. He thought about every black man who'd ever tried to be twice as good and still ended up here. And for the first time that day, he stopped hoping this would all be over soon. Because he knew better. He knew that sometimes the only way out was through. They put Marcus in the back of the cruiser without another word. The door closed with a dull finality that made something in his chest go hollow. As the car pulled away from the bank, he caught a last glimpse of his check, still lying on the hood of his sedan, fluttering in the breeze like it was waving goodbye to whatever piece of peace he'd managed to build. The drive to the station felt longer than the whole stretch of highway he'd crossed coming home from deployment. He tried to keep his breathing even, tried not to look at the radio where the officer mumbled updates about him like he was inventory. Black male, approximate age late 30s, suspected in robbery, detained without incident. Without incident. Marcus let the phrase echo around the cage of the back seat. Like the incident wasn't happening right now. Like it wasn't going to stain the rest of his life, no matter how this ended. They brought him through this side entrance. He noticed how the older officer didn't look at him when they walked past the booking counter. Just kept his eyes straight ahead, like Marcus wasn't worth the effort. Inside the holding area, everything smelled like bleach, stale coffee, and fear that had settled into the walls. A clerk took his belt and shoelaces without meeting his eyes. He asked to make a call, and the clerk gestured vaguely to a phone mounted on the far wall, still slick from the last man's palms. Marcus dialed his sister's number. He closed his eyes while it rang, already dreading her voice. When she picked up, he tried to keep his tone level, like he wasn't cuffed and hollowed out. Like this was just an inconvenience, nothing to worry about. He told her where he was. He told her he didn't do anything, that he needed her to pick up Lila from school. There was a pause on the line so heavy it felt like it pressed on his shoulders. She said Marcus, and nothing else for a long moment. Just his name, full of a grief that was too old to be fresh. After he hung up, they put him in a cell with gray cinderblock walls and a metal bench bolted to the floor. He sat there, wrists resting on his knees, watching the minute hand crawl across the clock over the door. It was quiet in a way that didn't soothe. Just a stale, airless quiet, like the place had run out of words. He counted the scuffs on the floor tiles. He thought about his mother, who'd passed before he came home from the service. He thought about how she'd warned him to be careful. Always be careful, because you don't get the benefit of the doubt. He'd done everything right. He'd served his country, paid his taxes, raised his daughter alone since her mother left. But here he was, reduced to a badge number and the suspicion in a stranger's eyes. He lost track of time. Sometimes the door opened and closed. A new man brought in some drunk, some fighting tears, some too tired to lift their heads. Once, a young officer looked in at Marcus like he expected a reaction. But Marcus just kept staring at the floor. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. When the public defender finally came, she looked exhausted. Her hair pulled back in a loose knot, files tucked under her arm. She was black too. That small fact felt like the first decent thing that had happened all day. She slid onto the bench beside him and rubbed her eyes. "Mr. Bell," she said, voice low, "I have some updates." She explained that the bank security footage had been reviewed. That the real suspect was already in custody, someone who didn't look anything like him once you bothered to look close. That the charges would be dropped, and he'd be released as soon as paperwork was processed. Marcus waited for the relief to come. He tried to feel grateful. All he felt was a hollow ache in his chest. He nodded. "Thank you." She shifted, her voice gentler. "I'm sorry this happened." He almost laughed. Sorry didn't patch the hole left in a man when strangers decided he was guilty before they bothered to check. Sorry didn't mean his daughter wouldn't hear the story whispered behind cupped hands. Sorry didn't buy back the hours of his life stolen without cause. He stood when the deputy came to unbolt the door. His legs were stiff, like he'd aged 10 years in that cell. At the desk, they handed back his belt, his shoelaces, his wallet. The older officer was there, filling out a form. Marcus glanced at him, waiting for him to look up, to say something human. But the man didn't. Just scribbled something on the clipboard and turned away. As Marcus walked past, he heard the officer mutter to the clerk, voice low but not low enough, "Another one. You let your guard down, and they'll be right back in here tomorrow." Marcus stopped. The clerk looked at him, startled. The officer didn't single quotes to ... He could have said something. He could have raised his voice, demanded an apology that would never come. But all the words dried up in his throat. He turned and walked out into the late afternoon light, feeling like he'd stepped into a world that looked the same but wasn't. The sky was a flat, endless blue. Cars moved along the street like nothing had happened. A man in a suit stood near the entrance, tapping at his phone. Nobody looked at Marcus as he walked down the sidewalk, his steps unsteady, his mind turning over every moment of the day until he thought he might go mad. Outside the station, he stopped and pressed a hand to the brick wall. Just to feel something. Solid. He stood there until he could breathe again. Then he turned toward home, each step heavier than the last. The walk home felt longer than any march he'd done in uniform. Every step scraped at something raw inside him. His shirt clung damp against his back. His hands wouldn't stop trembling, no matter how tightly he clenched them. When he turned onto his street, he saw his sister's old sedan parked by the curb. Lila was sitting in the back seat, hugging her bear so hard it looked like she might pull the stitching loose. As soon as she spotted him, she scrambled out, her little sneakers slapping the pavement. Daddy. He crouched, arms open, bracing for her weight as she slammed into his chest. For a moment, he just held her, buried his face in her hair, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of cereal and kid shampoo. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were red. "Auntie said you had to work late." His sister stood by the car, watching with an expression he couldn't read. He knew she'd tried to protect Lila from the truth, but he also knew that eventually the story would find its way to her. It always did. He stood, keeping Lila tucked under his arm. His sister reached out, squeezing his shoulder. "You okay?" Marcus didn't know how to answer that. He wanted to say he was fine, that it didn't matter, that he'd shake it off. But he couldn't force the lie past the knot in his throat. Instead, he nodded once. Just enough to let her know he was still here. She left after a while, giving him a look that said she'd come back if he needed her. He carried Leela inside and set her on the couch. She watched him with wide, worried eyes as he moved around the living room, picking up the same magazine 3 times, not reading a word. Finally, she spoke. "Did you get hurt?" His heart squeezed. "No, sweetheart. I'm okay." She hesitated. "Did somebody be mean to you?" He sat beside her, resting a hand on her small shoulder. "Yeah, somebody was mean." She looked down at the bear in her lap, twisting its ear between her fingers. Marcus thought about all the things he could say. That she should never let anyone treat her like she was less. That the world could be unfair and sometimes cruel, but she was worth every bit of dignity she carried. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt too big. Instead, he pulled her close again, holding her until her breathing evened out. After he tucked her into bed, he sat in the kitchen with the lights off. He let the dark settle around him. Steady and unjudging. In that quiet, something shifted. At first, he thought it was just the exhaustion draining out. But it felt different, sharper, like a blade being honed. Against the stone of what he'd survived, he reached for a legal pad. From the drawer. The one he used for grocery lists, reminders, school forms. He set it on the table, smoothed the first page flat with the palm of his hand. Then he started to write, every detail. Every word spoken. Every time they'd looked at him like he was nothing. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the night outside the window turned the sky the color of bruises. When he finally set the pen down, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not relief. Not even anger. Clarity. This wasn't going to be just another story that died in the back of his throat. The next morning, he made calls. The city's civilian complaint office. A legal aid group he'd heard about from a coworker. A journalist whose articles he'd read about police misconduct. His voice was steady as he spoke, though inside he felt like he might crack in half. By noon, he had an appointment with the journalist. By evening, he had a copy of the incident report and a promise that someone would look into the footage. It wasn't much, but it was more than silence. The following week, he sat across from the journalist, a young black woman with a recorder on the table between them. He told her everything. His hands shook as he spoke, but he didn't stop. When he finished, she looked him in the eye and said, "You did the right thing coming forward." He left her office feeling lighter, though the anger still burned under his ribs. Not the wild, hopeless kind that had nearly swallowed him in that cell. This was different, controlled, focused. When he walked through his front door, Lila was waiting with her homework spread across the coffee table. She looked up and grinned, like nothing had changed. Maybe, he thought, not everything had to. That night, he sat by her bed while she slept, watching the rise and fall of her breathing. He felt something settle in him. A conviction that no matter how many times the world tried to knock him down, he wouldn't stay there. If they wanted him silent, they'd be disappointed. If they wanted him broken, they'd be waiting a long time, because he knew now that his story mattered. And he was going to make sure it was heard. The story found its way into the paper a week later. Not the front page, no. They saved that for other headlines, but big enough to catch the eye. Marcus's name in black print, the details of the arrest laid out in cold, precise sentences. He read the article 3 times, sitting at the kitchen table with the morning light slanting across the floor. Each time he finished, he felt the same strange blend of satisfaction and shame. Satisfaction that the truth was out there. Shame that it had to be his name on display. He wondered how many neighbors would read it over their coffee, if they'd shake their heads or fold the page shut and move on. Later that day, a knock came at the door. When he opened it, he found his supervisor from the security firm standing on the porch, holding a small brown envelope. "Just wanted to check on you," she said, her voice quiet. "And to make sure you had this." She handed him the envelope, his paycheck, the one he'd never gotten to deposit. For a second, he just stared at it. This simple slip of paper that had started everything. He thanked her, his throat tight, and she squeezed his shoulder before she left. He stood there, holding it, realizing that even a thing as ordinary as payday could turn on you if you looked the wrong way. But the calls started coming, some from people he'd known all his life, others from voices he didn't recognize. Folks telling him they'd read his story, that they believed him, that they were sorry for what he'd been through. A few shared their own stories of stops, of searches, of quiet humiliations no one ever talked about out loud. It surprised him, the way people opened up. Like his honesty had unlocked something in them, too. He started going to the community center on Thursday nights. There were meetings, informal gatherings of folks who'd been through the same grind, the same disbelief. They'd sit in a circle of folding chairs, each telling the version of their story they could bear to say out loud. The first time he spoke, his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He felt like he was standing naked in front of strangers. But when he finished, the room went quiet, and not the bad kind. A quiet full of respect, of understanding. After that, he kept coming back, week after week. He learned names, learned how to listen as much as he talked. Learned that there was power in simply refusing to pretend you were okay when you weren't. One evening, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20 stood up to speak. He shifted from foot to foot, eyes fixed on the scuffed floor. They did the same thing to me, he said, voice small. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Like it was my fault somehow. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He stood, crossing the small space between them, and rested a hand on the kid's shoulder. It wasn't your fault, he said, steady and certain. None of it was your fault. He realized as he said it that he believed it about himself, too. A month later, the city released a statement saying the officers involved would be retrained. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing. Just a polite arrangement of words that meant nothing would really change. He read the statement twice, then set it down. He could have let the disappointment swallow him, but he didn't, because he knew this was only the beginning. The journalist called again. She wanted to do a follow-up piece. He agreed, though the thought made his stomach twist. This time, the picture they took wasn't a mugshot or a blurry phone video. It was him standing in front of the community center, Lila perched on his hip, her arms looped around his neck. When the article ran, the photo looked almost defiant. That night, he sat at the edge of his bed while Lila slept. He thought about the long road behind him and the longer road ahead, about all the men who'd never gotten to tell their side, about the kids growing up with that same quiet fear in their chest. He knew he couldn't fix everything. He knew he couldn't protect Leela from every hurt, but he could teach her that her worth wasn't up for debate, that her voice mattered, that you could stand up even when your knees were shaking. He brushed her hair back from her forehead, listening to her soft breathing. Outside, the street was quiet, but it didn't feel like the uneasy hush he'd known all his life. It felt like a pause, like the space before something better could begin. As he lay down, Marcus thought of his mother. The way she'd taught him to keep his chin up. The way she'd said, "Don't let them decide who you are." He finally understood what she meant. He closed his eyes, feeling the last of the day's heaviness slide off his shoulders. He knew tomorrow would bring more questions, more struggle, more of the same tired excuses. But he also knew he wouldn't be silent anymore. He would keep telling the truth, because sometimes that was how the world changed. One story at a time. This is David from Injustice Voice. If you felt something in this story, if it made you think, or remember, or hope, subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and tell me what you believe in. Because when we speak together, they can't pretend we're invisible. Thank you for listening.